welcome to Countdown to Daytona. I'm Dan Lucas, and thank you for joining us today. If you missed our Media Day special, you can check that out online and clips from that as well. It was a wonderful afternoon with some of the top drivers in NASCAR here at the Daytona 500. 13 drivers we got to chat with yesterday, so that was a lot of fun. But now we're turning the page a little bit because this is always a big week here at Daytona International Speedway. They call it Speed Weeks for a reason. There's something going on every day, and of course it leads up to the Daytona 500 this year, the 61st running of the Great American Race. Behind me here you can see we're in the garage area, and the fans have access to this here. This is one of the great things about Daytona. The fans can mingle around, they can get close to the drivers, and that's what they like the most. If you go up to one of the windows, you can actually see into the garages and see the teams working on the cars when they're allowed to be in there. So it's kind of cool. Every once in a while they'll wave at you and take a picture, but the fans love it here in this fan zone area at Daytona. Right now I want to introduce our guest for today, the wonderful Holly Cain, a NASCAR writer, NASCAR Wires Services, also a contributor to NASCAR.com. Holly, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
You know, for you're on this circuit. Everywhere this circuit goes, these guys go. It's like the big show. The Beatles are in town, but it always feels different here at Daytona.
It does. There's just something about Daytona International Speedway, and there's so much on the line, and having it start here, it feels like the natural place for the season to start, even though it's the biggest race of the year.
Now, one of the topics we always discuss going into every season, rules changes. Sometimes it's tiny little tweaks, sometimes they're big. I know last year we had some big changes that had an effect. This year you have some changes that's more, it's not so much a safety thing, it's a competition thing, I believe, that I'm reading into it. But we had some reaction from the drivers. Oh, and by the way, let me go back and preface that these rules don't apply to the Daytona 500. It is really a season impacting thing. When they come back here to Daytona in July, they'll be under the new rules. So just a general overview of things that'll be affected. And what kind of reaction did you get from the drivers?
I will tell you, and I've been covering the sport a long time, so I've seen lots of reactions to a lot of different rule changes, and I really felt like it was very positive, and the drivers were looking forward to it. And I think that only bodes well for the fans. I think we're going to see closer racing. I think the fans are going to be excited about it, and the drivers, of course, you know, there's still to a certain extent, what are we going to have? They don't know yet till they get out and are able to do it, but they certainly go in with a very optimistic look.
Now, and we had, I mean, rules aside, they want to make better racing, tighter racing, and I don't know how you're going to get tighter racing here at Daytona. But anyone who saw the Clash the other day, you saw one big move in the race, and it was the big one at Daytona. So we could be in for another wild ride on Sunday. Before we talk a little bit more about the changes, we did get some reaction. You heard Holly's take from the drivers. Let's hear a couple of the drivers on what these rules are going to do to impact the 29 season. Take a listen.
I think it's going to change a lot through the season of teams realizing what it takes between how trimmed out you want to be for raw speed or how well you have to handle. That's going to change from Atlanta to Vegas. You're going to be way more trimmed out at Vegas than you will be at Atlanta, just because you have to handle well in Atlanta because your tire's going to wear out. Vegas, not so much. So it'll take teams a little while to get used to that. And it'll kind of be neat to see the variation between what teams go with. But we'll find out.
We did a test. It was okay. But we won't know until we're all out there when it actually going for something instead of kind of manufacturing the test sessions that we had. We were always moving around, swapping spots. Some were legit clean passes, and some were us lifting, trying to fall in a certain spot in line, so it made it look like it was more than it was. So we'll see. You know, I'm not knocking it. I have no reason to knock it. It was different. You know, it was a lot of horsepower loss, but still felt like you still had some where you had to muscle it and be on top of your game.
From what I've heard from my teammate Austin Dillon having a chance to do the most recent test out in Vegas, it's not exactly like that. So there's small things that I think if you get your mindset set in that, hey, it's going to be the Xfinity package, that I may be in for a rude awakening. But on the flip side of it, there are characteristics that do kind of simulate what we had in the past there on the Xfinity side. So look forward to really just diving into competition and exactly honing in on what the differences are. I'll tell you one thing for sure is that the teams and the drivers are going to have to communicate an incredible amount to make sure we're getting the most out of them, because it's going to constantly evolve and change week in and week out.
It'll be fun to watch really the first 10 races. I think we all have to be open to, before we make judgment on this rules package. I know how quick we are to make judgment after one race, but I think what you see the first 5 races and what you see after the first 10 races or 15 races will evolve as teams figure out how to do this, as race car drivers figure out where their weaknesses are and fix them, and where their car's weaknesses are and fix them. That'll change this whole thing a lot.
Okay, Holly, we just heard some thoughts, and I think a lot of the drivers are open-minded, and obviously it's not going to impact this race on Sunday. It's not going to really kick in until Atlanta and so on, and even then, they say 5-6 weeks it's going to take us to get this figured out, but Talladega comes up, and then we're right back here at Daytona in the middle of the summer. Do you think, that this could impact the sport at all? Or?
I think several of the drivers told me yesterday that they think that the change in the rules package is actually going to produce even more winners. They thought that's going to be something that the fans are really going to
notice.
Open
it up to more teams.
Absolutely, that there's going to be more. If you remember last year, we had 2 drivers win 8 races, and Kevin Harvick and Kyle Busch, and Martin Truex Jr. won 4. So the big 3, they were dubbed, really kind of dominated the season, and ironically, all 3 of those drivers told me yesterday they think it's really going to open it up a little bit more this year.
I know, and I remember speaking though with Kevin Harvick, and it came down to the end rate. And I'm switching kind of the playoff mode here, but I said, what did you think of the playoffs before what happened at the end of last season, and then what do you think of it now? And you know what, he wasn't against how it happened, how it ended for him with Joey Logano winning the title on the season's final day over him, who had a tremendous track record all year. But he thought that he would like to see other things, maybe the season be a tad shorter and that sort of things to kind of maybe tighten it up even more. But he didn't have a problem with how the competition side went, and I think overall, like you're saying, that's probably a good thing.
Well, it was certainly an interesting finale because the person that had won the least during the year won the championship, but that's exactly what's presented there. That's why you have it come down to 4 drivers eligible, and any of them can win. So it's really up to whoever, and I think last year was that moment where really made people realize, you win the 8 other times, you've got to win at Homestead. So I think that race continues to take on more importance.
I think what we may see this year is when you have the bigger field at the beginning of the playoffs, you might have a tighter bunch. Sometimes you get to the first race and the second race, it's easy to eliminate, to whittle that field down, but there might be a little more mystery in race 3, 4, and 5 before we start to cut it down to 4.
Well, exactly, and win a race and you get to advance to the next round, and I think that becomes something that we see in more dramatic fashion, I think, this year.
I think that'll be good stuff. Speaking of drama, tonight are the duels, the RV, the Gander RV duels 1 and 2. It's 2 races. For those of you that aren't familiar with how it works here at Daytona, they run qualifying laps on the previous Sunday, which was this past Sunday, for the front row. The top 2 guys get those positions, and the pole sitter is William Byron. And number 2 spot goes to Alex Bowman, who, by the way, was last year's pole sitter. So those 2 guys are locked in, provided something doesn't happen to their cars.
Exactly.
But the rest of the field is going to race tonight in 2 separate races, and according to those finishes, then they will stack the rows for Sunday's Daytona 500. So I guess let's just talk about, we'll go in order here. Duel 1, you have William Byron, the pole sitter, leading the way here on the pole with Jimmy Johnson, his Hendrick Motorsports teammate, on the outside of row 1. It was a Hendrick weekend last week. What is it going to be tonight, in your opinion?
It was a Hendrick weekend again. It's been 5 years of Hendrick weekends of them winning the pole, for sure. I think this is going to be very compelling because William Byron is a 21-year-old, and he has a new crew chief, Chad Knaus, who used to be Jimmy Johnson's crew chief. So they have exchanged, and Jimmy, 7-time champion, really did not win last year for the first time in his career, went winless for a whole season, super motivated, won the Clash on Sunday evening, so he already, has a race win under his belt as he comes into the race tonight. So I think that's very important. I think we will see William be as protective as you can be at Daytona with his car because he doesn't want to have to trade that in. But there's several new guys in this first race. Also, rookie Daniel Hemrick, who's going to drive.
Qualified very well.
Yes, and he'll start third in that race. He is going to be somebody that is intent to get a message across. Martin Truex Jr., who we just spoke about. So I think there's a lot of really good cars. Kevin Harvick and Kyle Busch also in that race.
Paul Menard is a name I want to mention because he's the driver of the 21 car, and if you saw the Clash, There was rain threatening the race. Everybody said they saw it coming, so they sensed the end was coming for the event. So now you're getting into a let's get to the finish mentality. Paul Menard, the 21 car, led 51 laps of the Clash, seemed to be well in control of this thing. And all of a sudden, a bold move by Jimmy Johnson, the 48 car, essentially to grab the lead, and he sure did grab the lead. It took out about 16 or 17 cars in the process. Menard says, let's take blame out of it. Menard says the incident is behind them, but these two guys are in the same qualifying race tonight, and if they are 1-2 for whatever reason late in this race, I mean, do you just let it go? Or what do you do?
That will certainly make it rather dramatic, won't it? Yeah, you know what, though? I have to say, in all fairness, I think if you were to ask any of these drivers, when they're going in,
right,
rain is coming, this could be the last lap, who isn't going? I mean, what do you do?
Right.
Not make a move to win the race? So I think you have to give Jimmy a little bit of credit for going for it. That's what race fans want to see. They don't want to see him just finish in second. Of course, Paul Menard and the other guys that got crashed might not appreciate it now, but you're correct. I mean, can you imagine how compelling would that be if it's Jimmy Johnson and Paul Menard to win that race?
In this race, I did. Menard said yesterday at media day, he said, "Listen, we weren't so set up for the qualifying. We had a good car in the Clash, so we feel good about our chances here in the duels." He says he's going after it, and I think he wants to get a good spot in the 500, because if you lead laps out here and a number of laps, you're in contention possibly for the Daytona 500. So let's move on to the duel number 2. Alex Bowman, last year's pole sitter, who will start on the outside of row 1 this year in the Daytona 500. He leads the way against, guess who? A Hendrick guy, Chase Elliott. So you got Hendrick 1 and 2 on this. What do you see in this field tonight?
I think the second race is going to be equally as compelling. You know, Alex Bowman is a young guy. Chase Elliott, who starts on the outside row, his teammate, he was the most popular driver in the sport last year, taking that helm from Dale Earnhardt Jr., who retired. So Chase Elliott has a lot of fans. He's qualified on the pole here twice before.
Right.
He wants to win at Daytona, and
he's won a duel before, hasn't he?
I believe
I think he
so.
did win a duel
yes,
a couple years ago.
And he wants to win the 500. So I think this is exactly the kind of race where you see Chase make a huge statement.
I'm going through my memory, and it was just a couple of years ago. Kurt Busch 2 years ago when he won.
Right.
You had cars with fuel issues at the end. Truex was one, and I've seemed to think that Elliott was one of them.
Yes, Chase ran out of fuel.
Okay,
yes,
there was a point near the end of that race when you thought, oh boy, Chase Elliott might win the Daytona 500.
Yeah, and I can't imagine what the response would have been in the crowd had Chase Elliott won it. But yes, he ran out of fuel and came that close.
What do you see down the row here? I see names of guys who are Daytona 500 champions, series champions. I love Eric Jones. You may not know Eric. You may not be the most popular driver right now, but he has a win here on this track. It was
the most recent win.
Yeah,
the most recent cup win here.
He's a young driver who I remember we met him a couple of years ago, and he was so green and new to the sport. He was just trying to find his way. I mean, he's now, I don't know, is he middle-aged driver now at his young age?
Yeah,
what is he?
At the age of 24,
right,
he's now
exactly.
considered. I'm not sure. I know he's in his early 20s. He might be 22, 23 years old.
He's one of those guys now that you have to consider him. He's not somebody you're just going to dismiss.
He is definitely someone that has shown he runs well at this track, and he likes that kind of racing. And I will tell you, over the years, I've learned you kind of either buy into restrictor plate racing or you don't.
Yes.
And those that do seem to do a lot better. So saying you don't like it. Denny Hamlin is also in this race, a former Daytona 500 winner, and like Jimmy Johnson, went through a season last year where he did not win, and it was the first time in his career that he had an entire season and didn't win. Denny is super pumped and motivated. And the other person I want to mention out of that is Ryan Blaney, who led over 100 laps last year and did not win the Daytona 500. So he's another person that, they never say Daytona owes them, but you never know what they're actually thinking.
Yeah, the racing gods owe them, that's for sure. I'm looking at the list here in race 2. Eric Almirola in the 10 car. He was obviously the victim of the last lap move by Austin Dillon and the push from Bubba Wallace that eventually launches Dillon to the win in the final lap. Almirola has a win at Talladega, so he's a fast car who can run well out here as well.
And he's actually won a race here in the summer as well, several years back. So, he loves restrictor plate racing. He's all into that.
All right, well, this is going to be an interesting night for sure. It's a night of risks for certain people? Obviously, those who are trying to race their way into the 500. There are cars literally trying to qualify to get in to the field. They're not worried about positioning. Brendan Goen is one of them, trying to get it, make sure he's in there. But if you're William Byron or Alex Bowman, what is your job tonight?
Your job is to not let anybody touch your car. They want to preserve their car, have it as good as possible. Rick Hendrick came in and joked after his drivers won the pole position, an outside pole. He said if it were up to him, he would just park them so nothing happened. But that's
Exactly.
not the way it works in NASCAR. So they've got to get out there, and we shall see. And it has happened before that
Yes.
one of the front row cars has suffered damage in the duel and had to go to a backup and start in the rear of the field.
If you lose your main car here at Daytona, I guess the car you qualified in.
Right, yes.
If you lose that car for any reason, you can't get it to the start line on Sunday, that car, hey, use a backup car if you want to, but guess what? Whoop, to the back you go
Exactly.
for the start of the race. And that's, I don't know, 19, 20 rows back in some years
Yes.
if you have that a big field here. Well, that's all the time we have for the countdown to Daytona today on a Thursday, the afternoon of the dual qualifiers, a big night for the Monster Energy NASCAR Cup Series. Don't forget to check your local listings for our countdown to Daytona half-hour show coming up, previewing the race. Holly, this is going to be an awesome show. We have Austin Dillon joins us. Joey Logano, the series champion, joins us. Bubba Wallace has a great story. And some guy named Richard Petty, who has won a couple of races here. Wonderful day we got to spend with him at his museum, at his house up in North Carolina. It could have been all just about him, the whole 30 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. An hour.
Yeah, exactly. But good stuff there. And Andy Sabo jumps into the pits, tries to change a tire in the countdown to Daytona. It's not as easy as you think it is, trust me. And these guys can't call AAA. From the pits for sure. So for Holly Cain, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
I'm Dan Lucas. We hope you enjoyed the show today. We'll see you tomorrow right back here for Countdown to Daytona.